Dorothy Sayers. The guest had already left. Detective tales. It is an accepted folly of the English upper crust that dinner invitations once issued remain sacrosanct, quite as immutable as the 39 articles and rather less controversial at the bridge table. Thus it occasioned no small flurry of speculation when Sir Jocelyn Hartland's annual St. Etheldreda's Eve supper proceeded with one chair conspicuously vacant, and the silver place card proclaiming Mr. Bernard Catterick, guest of honour, glinting accusingly beneath the chandelier. Lord Peter Wimsey, pivoting his monocle with idle precision, surveyed the empty seat like a collector who finds a misfiled stamp in a rival's album, with irritation tempered by anticipatory delight. "Most irregular," he murmured, turning towards Miss Climpson at his elbow. "Either the fellow has succumbed to the notoriously treacherous footpaths of Brockenhurst, or, worse still, he has discovered a more compelling vintage than the 17 Chateau Latour, upon which Sir Jocelyn pins his fragile reputation." Miss Climpson, imported from London to assist Sir Jocelyn's parish charitable fundraising, but compelled tonight to make up numbers, stifled a smile. "You do believe in promptness, my lord?" "I believe in the rhythm of things," Wimsey replied, tapping the tablecloth. "An absent guest discomposes the metrical foot of the evening. Dinners, like good sonnets, require every syllable." The room, oak-panelled, redolent of polish and pheasant, fell into a hush as Sir Jocelyn himself appeared, face flushed a deeper crimson than the velvet drapes. "Dashed nuisance, Wimsey. Catterick's motor never arrived. Chauffeur telephoned from the village at 6:30. Tire burst, apparently, but they were to walk the last mile. Still no sign." He pressed a linen napkin against his forehead. "You don't suppose—" "I seldom suppose without evidence," said Wimsey, with a benevolent inclination of the head. "The verb is exhausting, and one must preserve energy for the port." He lifted his gaze to the great ormolu clock upon the mantel. Its minute hand, disapproving, trembled at 8:10. "I observe, however, that the chiming mechanism gains half a minute on the quarter hour. Pray remind me to speak to your clockmaker. He wages private war upon Greenwich." Lady Hartland, in pearls vast enough to circulate tides, attempted to laugh away the tension. "Peter, dear, one grows quite used to Jocelyn's obstinate timepieces. They keep us on our toes." Her smile weakened. Yet Mr. Catterick was so eager to discuss his collection of medieval chalice rubbings. He wrote to say he had something incalculably precious to unveil tonight. "Perhaps," offered Wimsey, "he has met with a rival collector. Those who covet relics of the sacrament are apt to display unchristian zeal." It was at this moment that Parsons, the butler, angular as a gargoyle and twice as gloomy, advanced with the whispered announcement that Superintendent Openshaw of the Hampshire Constabulary begged a private word with Sir Jocelyn. A ripple of incomprehension crossed the table. Spoons paused above soup. Wimsey rose with feline languor. "If I might accompany you, Sir Jocelyn? Police tend towards the procedural, and one wouldn't wish the consommé to congeal." Openshaw awaited them in the tiled vestibule, hat in hand, mustache bristling with apologetic discomfort. "Begging your pardon, sir. Matter of some urgency. Your guest, Mr. Bernard Catterick, has been found." He consulted a notebook, as though loath to recite the line from memory. "In the south transept of St. Etheldreda's Church. Deceased." Sir Jocelyn emitted a strangled expletive. "In the church? For heaven's sake, man, how?" Single gunshot to the chest. Openshaw shifted. Revers Cartwright discovered the body while setting up candles. No weapon in sight. Wimsey's eyes brightened, not with morbid glee. He was too well bred for that. But with the gleam of an astronomer spying a new comet. "A locked church, Superintendent?" "Doors were bolted from the inside when we arrived. Only the vestry key is missing." "Delicious," murmured Wimsey, and drew his pencil-thin notebook from a breast pocket. a death within sacred walls, a vanished key, and a tardy dinner guest. One fears the vestry will take precedence over the pudding. Sir Jocelyn flailed. But what of my party? Elspeth has manoeuvred Sir Ian Quarles 2 seats from Professor Turnbull, an arrangement requiring diplomatic finesse. Fear not, said Wimsey, patting the baronet's arm. The British appetite is indefatigable. Proceed with the fish, but keep the champagne upon ice. I shall reconnoitre and report. He donned coat and trilby with brisk cheer, and addressed Openshaw. Lead on, my dear superintendent, and pray indulge me if I ask trifling questions regarding bell ropes, candle grease, and the acoustics of your venerable transept. The Gothic was ever partial to echoes. As they departed into the November fog, Wimsey tossed a final remark over his shoulder. Tell Parsons to wind the mantel clock, Lady Hartland. We may require sympathetic horology before the night is out. And so, with dessert plates cooling and scandal warming, a chilly breeze swept through Hartland Court, carrying off one amateur antiquarian and inviting in something darker altogether. The fog thickened as though the very lanes had conspired to muffle scandal, and it took Openshaw's lantern, swinging like a small disgruntled moon, to guide them over the frost-slick flagstones to St. Etheldrada's. A feathering of rime glazed every headstone. The yews crouched blackly, dripping. When Wimsey set hand to the ancient iron gate, a gritty screech went up, half owl cry, half rusty protest, an effect, he noted, more theatrical than reverent. Inside, the nave lay in chill candle shadow, all the arches yawning vaults overhead. Policeman Pigeon, boot heels planted at military angles, snapped to attention beside the south transept arch. Body within, my lord. Superintendent. He lifted the lantern flap, banishing darkness in a raw yellow pool. The flagged floor shone like wet slate, but the air smelled of beeswax and damp books rather than blood. A reticence Wimsey found appropriate to a church. Bernard Catterick reclined against a pillar base beneath the tall lancet window depicting Saint Sebastian, arrow-ridden in stoic agony. Catterick's pose, one leg sprawled, recalled the saint in unfortunate parody. Only the bullet hole offset to the left of the sternum marked intrusion. The candle stumps on the prie-dieu still guttered, their pools of wax half solidified. Wimsey crouched, monocle glinting. Neat, central, little bleeding. A round makes for a small caliber, I should judge. A 32 perhaps. He did not thrash. Would a man so punctilious as Mr. Catterick sit for death without a cry? Openshaw began a grumble about stiff upper lips, but was interrupted by the arrival of the rector, Reverend Cartwright, his surplice tugged on hastily over a thick cardigan. The clergyman's usually tranquil brow held a tremor. I came to light the transept candles for the annual vigil, Lord Peter. Discovered him thus at 20 minutes to 8. I confess it gave me an unclerical word. Wimsey smiled. Transient lapses are allotted even to the cloth. Did you disturb anything? Nothing but the body itself. I touched his wrist. A foolish hope there might be life. Cartwright's voice shook. The doors, you'll have seen, were bolted on the inside. I unshot them myself to fetch Sergeant Martell. Bolt and bar accounted for, Openshaw confirmed, indicating the heavy wooden leaves now propped open. No sign of forcing, the vestry key still missing. Wimsey paced, counting strides. From the lich gate to this arch, 84 yards. A nimble walker manages it in, say, 45 seconds. Dinner at Hartland scheduled for 7:30. The tire bursts at 6:30. Catterick elects to walk, carrying a small attaché case. He glanced round. No case present. Pigeon cleared his throat. Found Summit, sir, back of the choir stalls. He presented a lacquered half-mask, theatrical, white on one side, painted vermilion on the other. Like for a mummer's play. Wimsey's brows elevated. Ah, the tragedy-comedy motif rendered literal. Our visitor arrayed himself for a drama, no doubt. He weighed the mask in long fingers. But why abandon so outre a trifle unless... Am I right, Superintendent? Unless one lacked pockets after divesting oneself of a cloak? He tapped at a smear of wax on the ribbon. Candles again. Always candles in. Gothic theatricals. Though I suspect the explanation will prove briskly prosaic. Reverend Cartwright, recovering a little, ventured a chronology. I locked the outer doors at 6 precisely, and remained in the vicarage kitchen until 7:30, preparing notes for the vigil homily. My study window looks towards the porch. I saw no one enter. And yet Mr. Catterick lies here, slewed like a toppled relic, Whimsy mused. What of auditory evidence? Bell ropes jangled, shots heard. The tower clock strikes every quarter, Cartwright said. At 7:45 I heard the chime clearly. Nothing else, no gunshot. Stone walls are thick, of course. Whimsy wandered to the aspersorium near the door. A thin skin of dust ruffled round the rim, broken by 2 clean ovals. He fitted his thumb to one. Someone dipped fingertips recently. A superstitious gesture or mere affectation. Openshaw signaled Martell, who produced a small tin of powder. Prince, my lord. In due course. But note the direction. The smear trails outward as though the dabbler left again by this door. But the bolt, Openshaw protested. Indeed, unless he bolted the door behind him from inside and removed himself by alternative egress. Whimsy craned to the high window, a lancet barely a foot wide. Not by acrobatics, I fancy. Perhaps by key. Yet only the vestry key is missing. The rest repose on that hook, very tidy. Rector, who besides you holds duplicates? Only Parsons the verger. He lives in Church Lane Cottage. He has not been summoned. It is his night off. Cartwright's expression faltered. He is, shall we say, fond of the alehouse quiz. My sympathies. Whimsy murmured, already at the choir screen, inspecting its carved misericords. He touched a fresh nick in the oak. Knife point caught here recently. See the pale wood. Superintendent, oblige me. Ask Pigeon to search for a penknife, perhaps discarded outside. At this moment, footsteps clattered and the lantern lights bobbed afresh. Sergeant Martell escorted an agitated, mud-spattered man in chauffeur's livery, Alfred Briggs, his cap clutched to a trembling chest. Beg pardon, sirs. Sir Jocelyn sent me. Wanted to help. Briggs's accent carried the clipped flatness of South London, though sanded by years in Hampshire. Tire gone to ribbons. Proper blowout. Mr. Catterick left me at the Fox and Mouldy Grapes 7:15. Would brook no delay. Took his case. Said he had to reach the church first, not the house. Bit queer, that. Why the church? Whimsy asked softly. Said he had a thing to hide where thieves respected God. Those were the words, my lord. Seemed excited, angry maybe, but pleased too. Like he'd got the winning card. Briggs swallowed. He paid for a pint to keep me company while I patched the wheel. Ordered me to fetch him 10 minutes after 8 if I wanted my wages. Yet at 20 to 8 he lay dead, Whimsy observed. You're patching. How long? Half hour. Innkeeper'll vouch. I drove up just now, found the police at the gate. Whimsy nodded. You noticed anyone on the lane? Lantern carriers, bicyclists. Only old Mrs. Tevis pushing her barrow of chestnuts towards the green. She'd not harm a fly. Flies may be sturdier than antiquarians, Whimsy said absently, and turned back to the transept. He slid a hand beneath Catterick's waistcoat, retrieving a slim leather wallet. Inside lay railway stubs, a subscription card to the Society of Liturgical Studies, and a folded letter blotched by candle grease. He opened it, 4 cryptic phrases arranged like epigraphs. The charnel path, the broken host, the silent quarter, the guest who left. No signature. Openshaw frowned. Religious mumbo-jumbo. Or directions, Whimsy countered. Observe silent quarter. The south transept is precisely the quarter with no organ pipes, ergo silent. Broken host, look there. He indicated the communion rail where a silver paten rested, its thin wafers disturbed, one split precisely in half. liturgical vandalism or significant semaphore. He crossed to the bell pull, its thick rope frayed near the bottom. A filament of scarlet thread clung where the hemp parted. Whimsy tweezed it free. Cardinal red. Not everyday cloth for a Hampshire parish. Save the verger's old livery cassock, perhaps. But Parsons is black serge. Lady Hartland's dinner guests, however, include Miss Hebe Quarles, a theatrical costumier of flamboyant tastes. I noticed a scarlet fringed shawl sliding from her chair. He pocketed the thread. Curious that a garment may migrate from dining room to transept without its owner. Openshaw muttered about incriminating evidence, but Whimsy only smiled. Nothing is incriminating until the clock chimes the correct minute. I advise caution. He knelt again at the body, studying the powder burn. Non-existent. Shot from a little distance. Reinforced by soundlessness reported by Rector. Low-velocity weapon muffled within stone walls. Shooter likely stood that side of pillar, bullet angled downward. Height of pillar base equals so much. The wound matching. He scribbled figures. Yes, our murderer is shorter than Catterick, or knelt, or fired from seating. Briggs shifted uneasily. He said he'd uncovered a fraud. Masks behind masks, he told me last week, laughing. I thought him tipsy. Masks again, Whimsy murmured, weighing the lacquer piece. Superintendent, please have this photographed and dusted. Meanwhile, let us see what the vestry yields. The vestry door, stout oak, stood closed but unlocked by Cartwright after the discovery. Inside, stale incense laced the air. Robe cupboards lined one wall, registry desk the other. Whimsy's torch found the keyboard, every peg occupied save the one labeled ST Transept. He fingered the worn lettering. A missing key, a missing attaché case, a missing shooter, pattern of subtraction. Yet we have, conversely, surplus, a theatrical mask, an enigmatic letter, a thread of scarlet. He rifled the desk. Among the marriage registers lay a recent catalogue from Sotheby's, early ecclesiastical metalwork. Marginal annotations in cramped ink circled lot, Sute 47. Pix, English, 14th C, wrought silver gilt, provenance doubtful. Beside it, someone had scrawled, "Confirm Hartland chancel rumour." He tore out the page and compared the handwriting to the letter. It matched. Catterick planned to confront our host with accusations of forged provenance, I suspect. Motive sprouts like mushrooms in a crypt. Openshaw blew out a long breath. Sir Jocelyn won't relish that. No, indeed. But relish seldom accompanies murder. Whimsy slipped the page into his notebook. We shall return to Hartland presently. The guests will have reached the liqueurs and candid indiscretion. Before we depart, Inspector, instruct your men to sweep the churchyard for traces of tire tracks on the grass verge, particularly narrow ones. Something on 2 wheels may have left lighter sign than Briggs' Daimler. Also measure the candle wax drips. The cooling rate will give us minutes, and minutes are meat and drink to a detective. Cartwright offered a tremulous blessing. My congregation will be appalled. Better appalled than complicit, Whimsy replied gently. Rest assured, Reverend. The wicked often imagine the Lord sleeps, but Providence is an indefatigable night watchman. For my part, I merely keep the minutes. As they stepped into the mist, the tower clock chimed 9, its note reverberating over dark fields. Whimsy paused, counting the echoes. Listen, Superintendent. 3 distinct rebounds, one from the Manor Lake, one from the barn wall, and one, faint but present, from the smithy at Mill End. Sound travels obligingly when one seeks alibis, or trips them. Openshaw muttered that he preferred fingerprints to acoustics. Both have their charm, said Whimsy, but we must not leave Lady Hartland to her anxieties any longer. Briggs, you will accompany us. Your tire will hold. Patched solid, my lord. Excellent. The game, as some hackneyed phrase-maker observed, is afoot. Let us see whose footfall proves audible. When, that is, one knows where to place one's ear. They went down the graveyard path, lanterns bobbing like cautious will-o'-the-wisps among the stones, and the night closed behind them with the soft, ecclesiastical sigh of a giant door settling upon its hinges. The drive back to Hartland Court wound through frost-laced hedgerows, the Bardier Daimler's headlamps slicing pale cones through the mist. Wimsey sat beside Briggs, gloved fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed as though composing a fugue rather than tracking a killer. The car's quiet hum was broken only by the faint ticking of the dashboard clock and the occasional crunch of gravel as they turned off the lane. As they pulled into the gravel sweep before the house, the front door opened at once, as if Lady Hartland had been watching from behind the heavy drapes. She emerged, shawl tight around her shoulders, with Sir Jocelyn just behind, wearing an expression composed of equal parts indignation and dread. "Well?" Sir Jocelyn barked before Wimsey's feet had touched the step. "Is it true? Dead, in the church? What the devil was he doing there?" "That," said Wimsey mildly, "is precisely what we hope to determine." Briggs slipped away toward the stables under Openshaw's eye, while Wimsey gestured toward the salon. "Perhaps we might discuss this where the port is warm and the fire sympathetic." Inside, the dinner guests had drifted from the table into varying states of distraction. Hebe Quarles perched near the hearth in a silk shawl that, even to the untrained eye, lacked a certain fringe. Professor Turnbull, face down in a volume of Latin riddles, was snoring faintly. Miss Climpson, knitting and alert, caught Wimsey's gaze and gave the faintest of nods. She had observed something, he was sure. "Peter," Lady Hartland whispered urgently as she led him toward the withdrawing room, "is it true? Bernard, murdered, but why? He knew so few people here." "That is rarely a barrier," Wimsey replied. "Murderers are often intimately shy." He paused just outside the door, allowing his voice to carry enough to be overheard. "We may now safely say this is a matter of premeditation, nothing accidental in a transept bullet. You were right to mention that he wished to unveil something. It seems he did, in the most final fashion." They entered, and the company turned toward him with the unblinking silence of a jury unsure whether it has been addressed or accused. "I must ask you all," he began, "to forgive this intrusion upon your evening. But since Mr. Catterick was last seen intending to arrive here, and was instead discovered some 100 yards away in your private church, dead, I must pose a few questions. You are not suspects," he added with his most charming smile. "Merely accidental characters in someone else's dreadful script." Sir Jocelyn poured a brandy with shaking fingers. "You said he was found in the south transept?" "Just so, seated as though awaiting something, or someone." Wimsey's gaze moved from guest to guest. Miss Quarles stared back, defiant. Turnbull remained drowsy. Mrs. Bancroft, the widow of a minor vicar and collector of Tennyson editions, looked ready to faint. Mr. Garnet, a lank antiquarian with a nicotine moustache, merely blinked. "Miss Quarles," Wimsey said suddenly, "have you by any chance mislaid a garment this evening?" Her hand went reflexively to her neck. No. Not that I recall. Why do you ask?" He pulled the red thread from his waistcoat pocket and held it between thumb and forefinger. "This," he said, "was caught on a bell rope in St. Etheldreda's. I understand you are a costumier. May I ask whether this color, this precise cardinal red, features in any item of clothing you wore or brought with you tonight?" She hesitated. I wore a fringe scarf during dinner, but it slipped under the table and I left it there. I haven't touched it since." Lady Hartland frowned. "I noticed it missing, dear. I thought perhaps you had retrieved it during the ladies' withdrawal." "No," Hebe said, suddenly pale. "I didn't." Wimsey tilted his head. "Then someone else did, perhaps with haste." That fringe would make a decent impromptu muffler for a small weapon. A derringer, say. Red to mask the smoke. One might fire through a fold of it without raising undue suspicion. But why? Miss Quarles's voice had sharpened. Who would use my shawl? I barely knew Mr. Catterick, only that he was investigating some church piece, some silver item. He asked if I could help identify certain heraldic devices on a chalice for authenticity. It was all quite civilized. And did he show you this chalice? Whimsy asked gently. She shook her head. He wouldn't say where it was, just that it was local and that it had been misattributed. He implied it might bring embarrassment to someone. Someone at this party? She hesitated again. I assumed. Perhaps Sir Jocelyn. Catterick mentioned Heartland's restoration funds. He seemed to think money had changed hands for a misdescribed item. He said the chalice had no right to be in the county. Sir Jocelyn turned purple. Good God, if he thought I'd trafficked in forgeries? No one said forgery, Whimsy interjected. Merely misattribution, though in such circles the distinction is often fatal. He stepped away and turned to Miss Climpson. Anything notable during dinner? She nodded briskly. Yes, my lord. I noticed Mr. Garnet excused himself between the fish and the pheasant. He said the game disagreed with him, but he was gone some 15 minutes. When he returned, his boots were damp. Whimsy's eyes flicked to Garnet. You've not been entirely candid with us, sir. Garnet stiffened. I went for air. I have a weak digestion. I walked only as far as the stable wall, which puts you within 20 yards of the Lich Gate, Whimsy said evenly. From there, it is a short dash to the vestry door, especially for one who knows the terrain. Garnet flushed. Are you accusing me? I accuse no one, said Whimsy, but I gather evidence, and you, sir, had a long and animated argument with Mr. Catterick at last month's society meeting. He accused you, did he not, of passing off a Flemish processional cross as Saxon? Garnet's nostrils flared. He was a sanctimonious little sneak, always trying to undermine reputations with clever footnotes. And perhaps he had threatened to do so again, Whimsy said. This time in writing. We found a note on his body, phrases like broken host, guest who left. Does that ring a bell with anyone? There was silence. Then Turnbull stirred, blinking like an owl. It's a riddle, he mumbled, voice thick with port. Classical structure, metaphors for betrayal, charnel path, death, silent quarter, a reference to monastic architecture. Clever, very clever. Then perhaps, said Whimsy, Mr. Catterick was playing a dangerous kind of game. One meant to expose someone here, a challenge, a final move. Openshaw entered at that moment, cap in hand. We found the case, my lord, buried shallowly behind the south wall of the chancel garden, just past the lilac hedge. And a chalice, as predicted. Silver gilt, but marked poorly, I'd say. Falsely, Sir Jocelyn groaned. Then he meant to humiliate me. Not necessarily, Whimsy said. It's possible he meant to warn you, perhaps offer terms. But someone decided such exposure couldn't be risked. Someone who knew the church layout intimately, had access to the keys or could retrieve one, and the initiative to act while the rest dined. His voice dropped. I'll want everyone's boots examined, the candle wax tested, the vestry prints compared, and Miss Quarles. If you find that your shawl is no longer under the dining table, do inform us. She was already moving, breath sharp. She reached beneath the long linen cloth. It was gone. A hush, dense enough to hear the hearth logs settle, closed over the room as Hebe Quarles straightened, her hands empty and trembling at the knuckles. The absence of the scarlet shawl was more eloquent than any scream. Whimsy's gaze traveled over the gathered faces with the inattentive grace of a cat watching sparrows. One might have thought him bored, save for the disciplined stillness in his shoulders. Sir Jocelyn, understanding that control of events was slipping from his own manicured fingers, cleared his throat, but no sound emerged. The grandfather clock in the corner, perversely proud of its eccentric half-minute gain, chipped at the silence like a nervous woodpecker. "Very good," Whimsy murmured at last, in the tone of a lecturer who has secured the class's attention. "We shall pursue the vanished scarf by purely homely means. Superintendent, allow no one to leave. Miss Climpson, oblige me. Take Lady Hartland and Mrs. Bancroft to the cloakroom and see whether any wrap or coat there carries the unmistakable breath of burned powder. Ladies observe details that clumsy. Men forget." Miss Climpson, alight with usefulness, shepherded the two women away. Openshaw posted Pigeon at the corridor as sentry, then returned to stand beside the French windows that looked onto the terrace. Outside, the fog had thickened into an opaline smear upon the glass, reflecting the drawing-room lamps so that every person appeared doubled, ghostly, beside his own shifting silhouette. Whimsy moved to the hearth, where Hebe still lingered. "You will forgive my insistence, Miss Quarles. Do you recall precisely when you last felt the scarf round your shoulders?" "During the soup," she said, struggling for composure. "It slipped off when I reached for my glass. Sir Ian Quarles, my cousin, picked it up. He draped it over the back of my chair. After that—" She lifted her hands hopelessly. Sir Ian, square and red-faced, confirmed the gesture with a grunt. "Damned nuisance," he said, addressing no one in particular. "All this cloak-and-dagger tomfoolery. Can't see why we don't telephone the Yard and be done with it." "We have," Openshaw replied mildly, though his mustache twitched. "They're sending a car first thing, but given the fog, Hampshire will carry on until London arrives. Meanwhile," Whimsy added, "we must catch the Yard up, not shuffle our feet until it arrives. Sir Ian, you dine here habitually. Does the south transept lie within earshot of this room?" Sir Ian considered. "Not directly. The old walls are thick, but if the vestry doors open and you're in the corridor by the music room, you can hear the organ, certainly. A pistol shot. Possibly, though dinner chatter might cover it." Whimsy's eyes half closed. "Dinner chatter, but not a lull between courses. Our victim died somewhere around 7:45, within minutes of Reverend Cartwright lighting candles. Let us match that to events here. Sir Jocelyn, do you keep a dinner book?" "Of course." The baronet took a slim Morocco volume from the escritoire. "I note the service times. Habit from my military mess days." "Capital. Let us see." Whimsy skimmed the entries. "Soup commenced at 7:36. Fish removed 7:48. Saddle of venison served 7:56. Garnet, you excused yourself at what moment?" Garnet coloured sallowly. "Somewhere between the fish and the venison. The bones were still on my plate." Sir Jocelyn confirmed. "I remember, because Parsons required staff to clear around him." He apologized. "Then Mr. Garnet was absent approximately from 7:48 to 8:03, Whimsy concluded. "Long enough to nip across the lawn, down the yew walk, through the wicket, to the church, commit murder, secrete the chalice, and return, if he knew his path. Still, it would be athletic for a gentleman of your, quiet habits." He smiled apologetically. "I do not accuse. I measure." Garnet pressed lips thin, but said nothing. Miss Climpson now re-entered, cheeks brightened by the crisp air of duty accomplished. "Nothing reeking of cordite, my lord. Lady Hartland's ermine muffs still smell of lavender sachets, and Mrs. Bancroft's cape of orris root. But one odd thing. I found a pair of gentlemen's leather gloves, discolored inside with something sticky. Not blood, more like wax warmed against skin and rubbed into the lining." "Wax again." Whimsy nodded. "Where were they?" "Stuffed behind a hat box on the third shelf." "Superintendent, impound them." He accepted the gloves and a handkerchief, holding them by the cuffs. "Size 8, narrow fingers. Whose wardrobe claims them?" Sir Jocelyn looked round helplessly. "Could be any of us. Most men have spares." But these are peculiarly scented with Russian leather and clove oil. A connoisseur's fancy. Turnbull, do you indulge?" The professor blinked, affronted. Cloves. Hideous affectation. Sir Ian. Wear gauntlets, the colonel said briskly. Those aren't mine. Wimsey's glance drifted to Garnet, but the antiquarian spread his stubby fingers defensively, evidently too broad for the gloves. At last, Wimsey's gaze settled on Briggs, the chauffeur, who had re-entered to fetch coffee. The man started as though feeling the scrutiny tap his shoulder, then he shrugged awkwardly. My lord, I own a pair, but mine are with the motor kit. Smell more of petrol than perfume. A pity, Wimsey murmured, shelving the matter for later. Now, the shawl. Superintendent, have your constable search the public rooms. Discreetly. Something so vivid cannot remain unseen unless hidden by intent. Pigeon vanished on his errand. Meanwhile, Wimsey crossed to the clock on the mantel and drew from his pocket a travelling chronometer. He compared the two faces. We gain half a minute every 15, Lady Hartland. That puts this contraption fully 2 minutes fast by now. Therefore, when Sir Jocelyn's diary says soup at 7:36, it was, in Greenwich terms, 7:34. Our chronology must use absolute time, else we chase phantoms. A movement behind him made him turn. It was Mrs. Bancroft, clutching her Tennysons to her chest. Lord Peter, she quavered, may I speak privately? I'm not strong with scenes. Wimsey offered his arm and guided her to a small writing room off the hall. Openshaw hovered, but Wimsey shook his head. Merely pastoral. The door closed. Mrs. Bancroft's voice emerged in tremulous bursts, like water from a faulty pump. She had, she confessed, left the table briefly to compose herself after Garnet's departure. Nerves, she said, and the venison's richness. In the corridor she had glimpsed Sir Jocelyn's valet, Crichton, coming from the study with a small parcel wrapped in silk, exactly the colour of Hebe's shawl. He had slipped up the back staircase. She had thought nothing until now. I should be wretched to malign a servant. She finished, dabbing her eyes. But you did ask if we observed anything. Most helpful, said Wimsey, patting her hand. You observe more than Tennyson's Lady of Shalott, who only saw shadows. You see the loom itself. He returned to the drawing-room and, beckoning Openshaw, sent him to fetch Crichton. The valet, when produced, looked the model of correct servitude, yet a sheen of perspiration glimmered under his precisely parted hair. A faint, spicy fragrance, clove, hung about him. Crichton, Wimsey began almost conversationally. You served with Sir Jocelyn during the Mesopotamian campaign, did you not? Yes, my lord. Voice steady, eyes controlled. I was his Batman. Useful training. A Batman handles sidearms, cleans them, perhaps practices marksmanship during idle intervals. Does Sir Jocelyn still keep a service revolver? Crichton's poise flickered. I believe so, sir. In the gun-room. But the gun-room is locked, Superintendent? Openshaw confirmed. When the police had arrived, it was fastened, key in Sir Jocelyn's pocket. They had examined its racks. Nothing missing. Yet, said Wimsey, a small lady's pistol might not belong to the official collection, and so could be stored elsewhere. Crichton, do you recognize these gloves? The valet eyed them. I cannot say. Many gentlemen— Your voice shakes, Wimsey observed pleasantly. Mine does so only when the port is corked. These gloves, note, carry clove oil, the same you prefer for boots. Also wax, perhaps picked up from a candle used to light a dark transept. Crichton moistened his lips. I lit no candle, my lord. No, the candles were already burning when Catterick reached the transept, but someone may have steadied one to examine the paten, left a smear that ended up inside a glove. Suppose your master discovered that Catterick meant to expose a fraud. Suppose he instructed you to recover incriminating property quietly. When you reached the church, however, you met Catterick alive, brandishing a revelation and the chalice. Tempers flared. You drew a pistol, muffled it in Miss Quarles's shawl, and silenced him before he could name names. Then you bolted the door, secreted shawl and weapon in the silk parcel Mrs. Bancroft saw, buried the chalice, and returned by the back path, trusting the dinner party to supply your alibi. The room had edged closer, drawn by the soft drama of Whimsy's recital. Sir Jocelyn's face blanched guiltily, perhaps at the notion that his servant might act on suspected hints rather than orders, but the effect was damning. Crichton's composure buckled. "I swear, sir, Sir Jocelyn knew nothing. I meant only to protect your master's honor," Whimsy finished. "Old habit. Yet the road to homicide is paved with loyalty. Tell me, where is the shawl now?" Crichton's shoulders sagged. He turned out an inside coat, pocket. A fragment of scarlet fringe fluttered to the carpet. "I burned it in the scullery range 10 minutes ago, my lord. Or tried to. Silk smoulders. It doesn't flame." Openshaw seized him, but Whimsy lifted a hand. "Gently. Bring the half-burnt remains for evidence. We may yet recover enough weave to match the thread." Sir Jocelyn stepped forward in sudden paternal outrage. If Crichton acted, he did it misguidedly, but for my sake. "Surely, Peter, there's lenience." "For homicide there is only jurisprudence," Whimsy replied. "Yet your own position still teeters. If you abetted forgery, that is another matter entirely. Perhaps Catterick threatened blackmail, and Crichton assumed violent solution was desired." "No," the valet broke in, anguished. "He never said so. I overheard Mr. Catterick in the churchyard path when I went to fetch the evening mail from the lodge. He mocked Sir Jocelyn's scholarship, boasted he'd ruin Hartland name, show everyone the chalice was Flemish plate. I followed him into the church. His confession fractured, dissolved into choking. Openshaw cut it short with a curt nod to Pigeon, who led the man away, still protesting his employer's innocence. When the door shut, the drawing-room exhaled collectively. Whimsy glanced at Hebe Quarles, whose eyes glittered with unshed tears for her lost shawl more than for the slain antiquary. "Take comfort, Miss Quarles. Silk may perish, but art survives. We shall compensate the loss." He moved to the window, drawing back the curtain. The fog had thinned sufficiently to reveal the blurred outline of the belfry, lanterns bobbing where constables scoured the grounds. Across that ghost-lit expanse the tower clock told 10, clear, resonant, 3 beats of echo. "Now," he said softly, turning back, "let us test Crichton's story. If he reached the churchyard path by 7:40 to fetch mail, the lodge logbook should show his signature, and the postbag must be time-stamped. If those minutes align, we narrow our window, and we must ask, why did Catterick specify the transept? Silent quarter?" He thought to reveal something there. "I suspect the chalice was not the only secret concealed in sacred stone." Sir Jocelyn opened his mouth to protest, but Whimsy was already striding for the door. "Superintendent, to the lodge. Miss Climpson, secure the scullery stove and recover that silk. Professor, Sir Ian, pray keep the company civil until we return. There remains, I fear, another mask to be lifted before the night concludes, and the clock, though inaccurate, marches inexorably towards revelation." The night air tasted of iron as Whimsy and Openshaw strode across the terrace, gravel popping like gunshot beneath their heels. Beyond the gates, a single oil lamp glimmered outside the estate lodge, where Mrs. Finlay kept her solitary watch over half a mile of hedged drive. She opened the door the first. Knock. A square woman in a paisley wrapper, spectacles glittering with curiosity at the late-night visitation. "Beg pardon, madam," Whimsy said, sketching a bow more fitting to a dowager than a gatekeeper. "But we must intrude upon your records. Sir Jocelyn's valet believes he fetched the evening postbag at 20 minutes to 8. May we see your ledger and the bag itself?" Mrs. Finlay, flustered yet flattered, produced a ruled notebook from her escritoire. Whimsy flipped to the correct date. The last entry stood brazenly at 6:12 p.m., grocer's van out. followed by 2 precise columns of dashes stretching to the margin. No entry at 7:40, nor any signature in Crichton's neat, clerkish hand. She shook her head at Openshaw's query. "No one collected letters after 6, sir. I was boiling potatoes till 7:30. Would have heard the latch. Mr. Crichton never came. I'll swear on my mother's gift Bible." "And the bag?" She drew it from a shelf. Stiff canvas still sealed with the postmistress's wax. Whimsy weighed it thoughtfully. Unopened, untouched. That deprives Crichton of his stated errand. Yet he left the house. So where did he truly go? Openshaw muttered that a scullery range might presently tell. They thanked Mrs. Finlay and set off down the drive, torch beams leaping. Halfway they paused where the yew hedge opened upon a narrow footpath leading churchward. Whimsy knelt, passing the light along the earth. A lattice of prints crisscrossed the frost, muddled by police boots, but beneath lay 2 distinct impressions. One a pointed woman's shoe, the other a heel, broad but markedly worn at the outer edge, hallmark of Crichton's gait. Both tracks headed towards the church, only the larger returned. Whimsy measured the stride. The woman had trodden lightly and recently, for the rime still sparkled round the edges. He straightened. Our valet was not alone, nor first to the rendezvous. Note the overlay. Her step lies beneath his in the outward direction, but above on the return. She arrived earlier, left later. So either he followed her, or she lingered after his flight. "Miss Quarles?" Openshaw hazarded. "Possibly. Yet she claims to have dined throughout. Another shawl-wearer might fit." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. Recall Mrs. Bancroft left the table on nerves, and a widowed parson's lady is adept at church locks. They resumed their march, minds ticking. At the kitchen entrance, Miss Climpson met them, cheeks pink from oven heat and triumph. She held tongs gripping a charred silk bundle. Within its blackened folds winked the nickel barrel of a pocket sea camp, the muzzle still smudged sooty red. "Found in the ashpan, my lord, poorly concealed under cinders, the silk melted round it." "Excellent ferreting," Whimsy applauded. "And prints?" "Quite obliterated by fire, but the butt plates bear finger marks in wax. Partial, yet clear. Ridges." Openshaw sealed the relic. "We'll compare with Crichton, of course, though I mislike how convenient this looks." "Just so," said Whimsy. "Valets polish, they do not forget grease. A man who wipes silver daily would sooner eat soap than leave prints. This reeks of staging. Someone wished Crichton's loyalty to stretch to confession." They stepped into the servants' passage. A door at the end opened upon the back stairs. Halfway up, a narrow window admitted the merest shaft of moonlight, and in that chill beam a ribbon fluttered, a shred of scarlet caught on a protruding nail. Whimsy teased it free. It matched exactly the thread from the transept bell rope. "Interesting," he murmured. "Our shawl travelled this route, not the grand staircase, suggestive of one who knows staff ways." They descended into the pantry, where Parsons the butler oversaw constables cataloguing decanters. The old retainer bowed. "My lord, might I mention, Mrs. Bancroft requested peppermint water from the still room at roughly 8:20. I escorted her as far as these stairs, then returned to carve the venison." "And did she obtain her draught?" "The glass lies yonder, dosed with laudanum, if my nose serves. It stank of opium tincture." Whimsy considered. "Sir, a widowed lady of delicate disposition might carry laudanum. She might also know that a few drops dull the nerves before mischief. Superintendent, please take her reticule at once." While Openshaw dealt orders, Whimsy crossed to the still room, where the half-drunk peppermint water stood. A faint lipstick rim clung to the glass. Beside it lay a crumpled paper twist labelled C. Morley and Son, Dispensing Chemists. Inside remained mere residue of brown crystals. He pocketed it carefully. Voices rose in the hall, Sir Jocelyn's thunder joined by Mrs. Bancroft's higher pitch. The widow, escorted under constabulary gaze, looked smaller than before, but her eyes shone with a fierce, uncanny calm. "I trust this indignity has a reason, Lord Peter," she said, chin up. "Everything has a reason, Mrs. Bancroft. Our challenge is deciding which reason fits which act. You knew Mr. Catterick elsewhere, I think." Her reticule trembled in Openshaw's hand until he extracted a sheaf of letters tied with blue silk. The widow's breath caught. "Allow me," Wimsey said gently. He read the heading, "My dearest Rose." Dated 2 years past, Venice. Rose Bancroft, née Rosamond Catterick. Colour drained from her cheeks, her lips compressed, yet she made no denial. Wimsey continued, "Your brother, Bernard, disappeared from your life after a quarrel about your husband's debts. When Mr. Bancroft died last year, you sought reconciliation, but Bernard had grown venomous. He threatened to expose the forged chalice, ruin Sir Jocelyn, who supported the church where your husband lies buried, thus sully your late spouse's memory. You tried persuasion. Tonight you attempted laudanum to steady your plea." His tone softened only slightly. "But someone overheard, feared blackmail, and decided on sterner remedy." She shook her head slowly. "I never harmed him." "No," Wimsey agreed. "Yet you may have unwittingly armed another. That chemist's twist contains potassium chlorate crystals. Strike anywhere, match heads reduced to powder. Combined with laudanum, it forms a crude flash powder, effective to dry a pistol and mask smell. To whom did you lend your pouch?" Her eyes flicked to Garnet, who hovered at the drawing-room threshold. At that instant, Pigeon returned, waving the waxed gloves. Inside, he had found a folded wax paper square etched with microscopic rubric, Heartland Pix, milled rim, non-English silver, Garnet to expose. Garnet blanched as white as church marble. "Enough," Wimsey said quietly. "Mr. Garnet, you were once Catterick's friend, later his rival. He possessed correspondence proving your earlier forgeries, threatened to reveal them with the chalice scandal. You borrowed Mrs. Bancroft's laudanum for nerves, dissolved chlorate to dry the shawl-muffled shot, wore Crichton's spare gloves from the cloakroom, smelling of his clove oil, to shift suspicion. You followed Catterick to the church, killed him, buried the chalice where he had meant to show it, then returned through the staff stairs, dropping the shawl for Crichton to find. You even prized free a mask from your pocket, symbolic, perhaps, of your double life, to stage a puzzle." Garnet's mouth opened, closed. "He would have ruined me," he said at last, desperation cracking the scholarly veneer. "All my work, my reputation, gone. I only wished him to burn the papers. He jeered, called me a charlatan." The hands that clutched at nothing in the air were small enough for the gloves. Openshaw stepped forward, but Wimsey forestalled him. "One point remains. The vestry key. Where?" Garnet's shoulders slumped. "Clerestory ledge, north aisle. I dropped it climbing out the organ loft window. I thought the door must look locked from within." "Indeed," Wimsey murmured. "I fancy Sergeant Martell will retrieve it." He turned to Sir Jocelyn, whose relief mingled uneasily with shame. "My dear fellow, the chalice's authenticity matters less now than the integrity of your circle. Replace it with something honest. Your reputation will mend." Sir Jocelyn swallowed and nodded. Mrs. Bancroft's composure had given way at last. She sobbed softly, not for her brother's death alone, but for the long cracked spider webbing through her past. Wimsey took her arm. "Courage, Mrs. Bancroft. You bore no weapon, nor planned his end. The law distinguishes." Openshaw led Garnet away, flanked by constables. The hall's shadows swallowed them. Wimsey glanced to the mantel clock. Still 2 minutes fast, but now permitted the imperfection. He turned to Lady Hartland, who hovered in the doorway, pale and weary. "Perhaps, Lady Hartland," he said, "you might order fresh coffee all round. Reality, like strong caffeine, is preferable to artificial stimulants. And it is nearly midnight." She managed a ghost of a smile and departed. Miss Climpson, gathering her knitting, met Whimsy's eyes with quiet respect. He winked, then walked to the window. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. St. Etheldreda's tower emerged charcoal black against a wash of moonlit pewter. Somewhere, a night bird cried, free from clock or timetable. Whimsy breathed deep. The case, though sordid, was cohering into a pattern as rigid and luminous as an ecclesiastical arch. There remained formalities, statements, corroborations, the forensic proofs, but the essential truth stood revealed. Another mask, indeed, had fallen, not with clatter, but with a scholar's genteel sigh. He took up his glass from the side table, found the port had breathed just enough, and lifted it in solitary salute. To Bernard Catterick, to misguided genius, to unmasked pretense, and to the relentless ticking of time that, whether accurate or faulty by half a minute, ultimately exposes every subterfuge. Whimsy's solitary salute had barely touched his lips when Sergeant Martell appeared in the doorway, cap askew, cheeks wind-burned from a sprint across the lawns. His urgency silenced the drawing-room chatter like a dropped goblet. "Beg pardon, my lord. Superintendent's compliments. Dr. Saunders wired from Winchester Infirmary. Preliminary ballistics on the bullet they extracted. Says it's a 4v5 service round, not a 32. The port in Whimsy's glass paused mid-tilt. He set it down as though it might explode. A 455. My dear Martell, that is a cavalry charge compared with the mouse we found in the scullery. He rose, voice deceptively mild. Summon Openshaw at once, and have the constable outside the gun-room guard remain precisely where he is until I arrive. Sir Jocelyn, half risen, croaked, But the gun-room, nothing missing. Indeed. Whimsy's eyes shone with frosty amusement. Which begs the question, if a 455 struck Catterick, where did it come from? Garnet's tiny sea camp couldn't chamber it. Something here is out of key, and we must hunt the discordant note. Openshaw arrived breathless, clutching a telegram. Whimsy read, lips moving silently at the diagnostic jargon. Entry wound clean, jacketed round, no close-range tattooing. He handed it back. That makes the sea camp a red herring of the reddest dye. Garnet's guilt lies elsewhere, burial of chalices and literary betrayal, perhaps, but not in pulling a Webley trigger. Superintendent, recover every 455 weapon licensed in this house. That's impossible, Sir Jocelyn burst out. Those revolvers haven't left their rack since the armistice. My dear Baronet, lead me to them and let the evidence speak. They descended to the gun-room, oak-lined, its scent of oil and walnut comforting to any sportsman. The rack was neat, each firearm tagged with a brass label. Whimsy's gaze drifted past bird guns and rook rifles until it landed on a Webley Mach 6 455, holstered. He tipped it free. 2 chambers were empty. 4 remained full. He sniffed the muzzle, then pressed a fingertip to the barrel crown. A faint grey smear transferred to his skin. Cleaned in haste, he murmured. Not well enough, though. Inspector, mark this. He broke the pistol, removed the cartridges. 2 showed strike dents unfired. 2 sat pristine. He pocketed the casings. How many rounds did you keep loaded? Always 6, Sir Jocelyn whispered, face ashen. Then 2 shots discharged. 1 in Bernard Catterick, the other perhaps as rehearsal or disposal. Whimsy snapped the Webley shut. The key lies with access. Only family or senior staff hold the gun-room key. Crichton and I, Sir Jocelyn admitted, and Parsons, in emergencies. But Crichton's been taken. Parsons was carving roasts. Whimsy nodded. Let us trace the second missing round. Superintendent, dispatch men to scour the lake's edge and the rose garden for fresh divots or lead fragments. Meanwhile, I would like the company to reassemble in the transept at once. Bring the ormolu mantel clock. Its inaccuracy may prove strangely useful. Within 20 minutes the party gathered in St. Etheldreda's, their footfalls echoing off stone. Police lanterns ringed the scene where Catterick's body had been. Chalk traced his final sprawl. Whimsy stood by the pillar, Webley in hand, its chambers flagged safe. "Kindly indulge an experiment," he said, voice carrying in the hush. "Sir Jocelyn, you are left-handed, yes?" The baronet started. Yes. A school fencing injury made the right unreliable." "Precisely." Whimsy indicated a chalk X on the floor 8 feet from the pillar. "Dr. Saunders fixed the bullet trajectory. Downward angle of 6 degrees, entry chest level. A shooter of your height would stand here, gun lifted thus, left hand, so pressure and aim align." He demonstrated, sighting on empty air. "Observe the lantern shadow, barrel, pillar, stain on floor, a perfect line. Step here, Sir Jocelyn." Silence cracked. Lady Hartland gave a stifled cry. Sir Jocelyn obeyed, jerky as a marionette. The pose resolved like a grim tableau. Even the polished toe of his shoe fitted an irregular scuff in the ancient flagging. Openshaw's voice was a rasp. "Baronet, do you admit—" "Not yet," Whimsy interrupted gently, "for we are still shy one piece. Miss Climpson, the clock, if you please." She advanced with the ormolu timepiece hugged awkwardly to her bodice. Whimsy set it upon Catterick's abandoned prie-dieu. This delightful impostor gains 2 minutes every hour. "Sir Jocelyn, you logged dinner service by it, yet Catterick scheduled his confrontation by Greenwich Mean. He expected you at 7:45, correct? Here, to witness proof of the chalice fraud. You arrived in haste, found him taunting, brandishing documentary condemnation. Your temper, provoked by fear for family honor, did the rest." His tone was almost pastoral. "You fired twice. The first missed, ricocheting, perhaps, into timber where we shall recover it presently. The second struck home. In panic, you seized the incriminating case, meant to hide it, but Garnet, skulking to steal his own secrets, saw the corpse, assumed opportunity, and buried the evidence himself, later staging accessories to frame Crichton. Misguided layers, indeed." Sir Jocelyn swayed, lips working. "I never planned." It was madness of a minute. He laughed, said my scholarship was counterfeit, my endowment a joke. And worse, he threatened your wife's standing, the church's trust. You felt cornered. Whimsy's voice softened. "Yet murder is a clumsy cure. The scales tip, the minutes betray. Even a faulty clock testifies." Lady Hartland stepped forward, tears unashamed. "Jocelyn, tell them it cannot be." "Peter—" But Sir Jocelyn crumpled to his knees beside the prie-dieu, hands clasping the rail as though already before penitential tribunal. The echo of his confession spread like ripples. "I fired, God help me, and I ran. I locked the weapon away, wiped it, thought none would look. Then I saw Crichton arrested, heard Garnet's babble. I had not the courage to speak." Whimsy set the Webley on the stone ledge, stepping back. Openshaw's men closed in. Gentle now. No man could be less dangerous than Sir Jocelyn, collapsed beneath a stained-glass martyr who seemed to weep crimson down his pains. Whimsy lifted the mantel clock from the prie-dieu and nudged its minute hand forward to the proper hour. "There," he said quietly. "Let it keep true time at last. Its testimony has earned the right." He turned to Lady Hartland. "His plea will read manslaughter wrought by provocation and panic. The court may temper justice with mercy. Meanwhile, stand firm. Forgery may stain parchment, but repentance can bleach the soul." Lady Hartland gathered her shawl, a sober grayscale thing, no shock of flamboyant red, and nodded. Whimsy addressed Garnet next, standing shackled beneath the tower arch. "You fabricated a melodrama upon a tragedy, sir, but your scholarship might still redeem itself, if you devote it henceforth to honesty. Remember, history eventually spots the misdated inscription." Garnet, grey, managed a twisted bow. The constables led their charges away, footsteps dwindling into the night. Only Whimsy, Miss Climpson, and Openshaw remained beside the cold echo of gunfire. Openshaw exhaled. 2 culprits, 1 corpse, layered like a blooming onion. Life delights in complication. Superintendent. Providence provided the bullet, the clock lent its perjury, human vanity did the rest. He tapped the broken host, still resting on the rail. Even this wafer, symbol of unity, lay fractured. A pity Catterick misconstrued that omen. Miss Climpson gave a small sigh, half sorrow, half satisfaction. You suspected Sir Jocelyn the moment you smelt cordite in the rack, my lord. Not suspected, wondered. But it was the left-handedness clinched it. The bullet path skewed slightly right. A right-hand shooter would angle oppositely. He smiled. Details, Miss Climpson. Always the carpets, curtains, or in this case, the handedness. Openshaw shook his head, admiration grudging but sincere. Well, Lord Peter, I'll see the paperwork drowns me till Christmas, but I thank you. Whimsy clapped his shoulder. Paperwork is civilization's price. Send me a carbon, if you please. I enjoyed the plot. He turned, offering Miss Climpson his arm. Come, my dear. The fog has lifted. I feel a star or two might risk appearing, and Hartland Court, though depleted, still promises coffee. They stepped out beneath the tower, its bells glinting high and mute, like bullets frozen in mid-flight. The air tasted of frost and distant sea salt. Over the hedgerows the manor windows glimmered, a constellation of human frailty and hope. Whimsy paused, drawing a deep lungful. You know, Miss Climpson, I'm reminded of Horace. Naturam expellas furca, tamen usque recurret. You may drive out nature with a pitchfork, yet it always returns. Our perpetrators sought to deny their natures, pride, fear, ambition, and nature made them confess in spite of themselves. Miss Climpson smiled. And what of your nature, my lord? Curiosity, I fear, incurable. It returns like a bad penne. Come, before the coffee grows tepid. He offered a companionable wink, and they hurried across the grass, their shadows stretching before them like fading masks discarded at the close of some grim, intricate masquerade. Whimsy and Miss Climpson reached the terrace doors just as the big hall clock chimed midnight, its sonorous boom rolling outward across lawns still silvered with frost. Within, the remnants of the party had collected in uneasy islands round the drawing-room hearth, coffee cups poised like sacrificial chalices. Sir Jocelyn, flanked by Openshaw's constables, sat apart on a brocade settee. The baronet's shoulders sagged, yet his gaze remained oddly abstract, as though he were already filing footnotes on his own disgrace. Garnet, under separate guard, stared into the empty grate with scholar's blankness. Mrs. Bancroft dabbed at her eyes but managed a wan nod of greeting. Whimsy accepted a demitasse from Parsons and tasted it thoughtfully. Cardamom, he murmured. Lady Hartland, you spoil us. The compliment steadied her. She managed a faint smile, then withdrew to give whispered orders about night trays and guest rooms. Only when she had gone did Whimsy address the superintendent. Any retrieval? Openshaw nodded grimly. Sergeant Martell found the second slug, lodged 3 inches deep in a choir stall beam. Had to carve it out. He produced a chamois swaddled object. Looked sound, though flattened. Whimsy unwrapped the soft metal and crouched beside a reading lamp. The bullet, still dusted with ancient oak splinters, showed 4 shallow grooves round its skirt. He reached into his pocket, drew one of the live cartridges removed from Sir Jocelyn's Webley and, careful of the primer, held it adjacent. The comparison took only a heartbeat. A fine line appeared between the thoughtful pinch of his forefinger and thumb. Yet he said nothing. Instead, he placed both items on a Sheraton side table and resumed his seat with marked serenity. Superintendent, he said lightly, has the armory at Winchester yet telephoned? They keep precise tooling records, number of lands and grooves in every service pattern since '92. Expect word by dawn. Splendid. Meanwhile, the orchestra may rehearse another movement. He turned to Sir Jocelyn, voice gentle. Baronet, forgive me. In the press of shock, I failed to ask whether you once carried a different sidearm, perhaps during your Mesopotamian tenure, before the Mark VI became standard. Sir Jocelyn blinked. I started with a Colt New Service model, 6-groove rifling, American issue, but I sold it at Port Said. Too heavy for desert marches. So only the Webley here bears your fingerprints. Whimsy nodded as though ticking off inventory. Yet this bullet, he tapped the evidence, bears 4 grooves. That corresponds neither to your present revolver nor to the peacemaker you discarded. Peculiar, isn't it? A ripple of new unease ran through the room. Garnet stirred. Mrs. Bancroft's kerchief froze halfway to her cheek. Whimsy continued softly, almost to himself. 4 grooves narrows the field astonishingly. One recalls the Colt Army Special, popular pre-war with colonial constabularies, and, of course, the Smith & Wesson hand ejector carried by certain cavalry volunteer units. His gaze settled on Colonel Sir Ian Quarles, who had until then occupied an upright wing chair with the stoicism of a bronze memorial. The colonel's mustache twitched. My dear Ian, Whimsy said, I believe you once drilled territorials at Aldershot with just such a weapon. Quarles's reply emerged gravelly. Yes, kept it for sentimental reasons. Locked in my gun case at Quarles Manor. Though you habitually travel with a Gladstone bag large enough to hold a revolver, and you fetched something from it when dressing for dinner. I know because I passed your door and heard the unmistakable clack of an oiled cylinder. A cavalryman's ears never quite forget. And a recovering, shell-shock patient, he inclined his head to Miss Climpson, learns to catalogue stray noises. May we see the bag? Colour mounted under the colonel's weathered skin. Dash your impertinence. A guest's baggage is not police property. I beg pardon, Whimsy replied, but a guest's property becomes relevant when a bullet of identical caliber, bearing grooves consistent with his retired sidearm, lodges 2 inches from an altar rail. Openshaw gestured. Pigeon returned swiftly with the Gladstone. The colonel muttered an oath, but did not move. When the buckles came free and the top yawned, the constable drew forth a folded mackintosh and, wrapped within, a blue steel Smith & Wesson. 2 chambers were empty. The remaining rounds matched the bullet on the table for deep-set lead and faint copper wash. The colonel exhaled, a long, controlled release, like a man blowing dust from a medal before surrendering it. I see, Whimsy whispered, almost regretfully. Now we have the other half of the choir stall mystery. He addressed Sir Jocelyn. Your confession, you perceive, cannot suffice. You fired, yes, but only the ricochet. The mortal shot came seconds later, at a sharper angle, from behind the choir screen where Colonel Quarles stood, his patience exhausted by Catterick's attack upon your family's honor. Likely you never even heard it. The nave swallowed echoes, the Webley's thunder stunned your ears. 2 left the church, each supposing the other culpable. Or so you believed, Colonel, until Crichton's arrest offered a cleaner scapegoat. Colonel Quarles rose. Stiff, imperious. Sir Jocelyn is my oldest friend. That carrion crow planned to disgrace him on the eve of our regimental reunion, and for what? Some venom about forged chalices. I followed Jocelyn from the table, meaning to intervene. When I reached the transept, he'd already fired. The fellow was cowering but alive, still jeering. Jocelyn staggered back in horror, dropped the pistol. I picked it up, but my own was in my pocket. Catterick lunged again. The colonel's hand trembled, then steadied as he placed it palm down on the console. So I took the simplest measure. You then returned your friend's Webley, minus 1 cartridge, to the rack, Whimsy supplied. Your own weapon you wiped, trusting different rifling to shelter Sir Jocelyn should ballistics examine the corpse. But the smaller pistol and the forged shawl, Openshaw interjected. A scholar's embellishment, Whimsy answered. Garnet arrived later, glimpsed the scene abandoned but appalling. He panicked, constructing his own camouflage round Crichton. 3 men's misdeeds wove a tapestry of coincidence. Sir Jocelyn stared at Quarles, disbelief and relief struggling for purchase. "Ian, why didn't you tell me?" Quarles's iron gaze did not waver. "You'd have denounced yourself, couldn't allow that." Whimsy's tone took on a weary kindness. "The Crown will not admire triple entanglements, but juries still respect gallantry. Openshaw, I commend the Colonel to your care." As Quarles surrendered, Lady Hartland re-entered, saw the tableau, and halted. Comprehension rippled across her face, swiftly followed by composure. She walked to her husband, knelt, and pressed one calm hand atop his. "You must live," she whispered, "to restore what scholars stole. We shall begin tomorrow. Open ledgers. Invite the British Museum." Whimsy permitted himself a small, approving nod. Miss Climpson, ever practical, produced fresh coffee for the constables. Garnet slumped, a man abruptly peripheral to his own intrigue. Outside, the frost cracked like distant musketry as the constables escorted Quarles and Garnet to separate cars. Whimsy watched through the window until tail lamps dwindled beyond the yews. Then he turned back to Sir Jocelyn. "You will still answer for reckless discharge," he said gently, "but not for murder. The heart's small hesitations saved you. Sometimes folly halts at the brink." Sir Jocelyn managed a threadbare smile. "A scholar's footnote to grace, Lord Peter." "Yes," Whimsy replied, retrieving his monocle as though concluding a symposium, and footnotes, contrary to rumor, occasionally rescue the text. Miss Climpson gathered her knitting and rose. "Shall I summon the household to their beds, my lord?" "Please do, and remind Parsons to reset every clock to Greenwich tomorrow. Accuracy, like virtue, is restorative." The grand corridor emptied by slow degrees, its sconces dimmed one by one until only Whimsy remained, a solitary figure beneath a vast Gainsborough. He raised the ormolu timepiece, now ticking obediently, and addressed it in confidential tones. "You were dreadfully unreliable in life, my friend, yet utterly truthful in death. I thank you." He set it atop a marble plinth, straightened his tie, and, with the faintest echo of footsteps on parquet, moved toward the library where a final glass of Chateau Latour, and perhaps a line of Sappho, waited to usher him into a dawn unburdened by masks. The chimney in Heartland Court's library exhaled a last sigh of warmth, and the fire's embers settled into a sullen glow. Whimsy, loose-limbed in an armchair that could have been designed for the reflective sinner, let the Chateau Latour ease its way toward dawn. Outside, the sky had ripened from ink to bluish-grey, enough to hint at frost-crusted lawns and the distant tower of St. Etheldreda's that had, for one turbulent night, eclipsed every social pretension within the manor. Somewhere in the corridors, a grandfather clock struck 4, far too loudly for an honest timepiece. The sound travelled in uneven pulses, like breath from an anxious sleeper. Whimsy set down his glass and flicked the ash of an untasted cigarette. His eyes, those deceptively languid grey eyes, rested on the 2 bullets lying side by side in a cut-glass ashtray, the flattened slug from the choir stall and the intact cartridge drawn from Sir Jocelyn's Webley. Presently, a tap sounded at the door, discreet yet urgent. Miss Climpson slipped inside, a sheaf of telegram flimsies pressed to her cardigan. "Forgive the hour, my lord," she whispered, "but the Winchester Armory has replied. They telephoned rather than wait for the post." Whimsy raised a brow. "Essential facts, eh? Let us see." The top sheet bore a succinct list of 4 505 barrels and their land and groove patterns. Webley Mc6, 7 grooves. Colt new service, 6. Smith & Wesson second model hand ejector, 5. And at the end, a note in red pencil, Colt Army Special, 4-form. Webley chambering for Dominion, 4 groove left-hand twist. 4. Not 5, Whimsy murmured. He lifted the choir stall bullet close to the lamp, rotating the lead under the lens of his monocle. 4 distinct grooves encircled its skirt. Our earlier count erred. The stall chips masked 1 valet. The colonel's revolver carries 5. This carries 4. Miss Clemson's expression, though quelled by fatigue, sharpened. Then Colonel Qualls's confession is an honorable falsehood, Whimsy finished. He believed he killed Catterick. He fired, certainly, but his round remained somewhere unaccounted for. Likely that ricochet we attributed to Jocelyn's wild first shot. The Webley slug, too, must be lodged in a wall. Yet the fatal caller came from an army special, unique beast, and not one we have located. Miss Clemson's knitted brows puckered. Who in Hampshire would own such an unfashionable model? The colonial services, police volunteers, perhaps a missionary or chaplain. He let the implication hang. Fetch Superintendent Openshaw, would you? Then rouse Reverend Cartwright at the vicarage. Tell him Lord Peter craves 5 minutes spiritual counsel before sunrise. Clergy can refuse many things, but rarely a penitent peer. Within half an hour, with coffee hastily scalded in the pantry, Whimsy and Openshaw were striding the rime-white gravel toward the rectory. The east had flushed pink. Frost glimmered like powdered crystal along the yew hedge. A wagtail skipped across the sundial, affronted by human footfalls at such an hour. Cartwright received them in a shabby dressing gown, spectacles fogging above a teacup. "My lord, Superintendent, regrettable hour, I know. How may I serve?" "By satisfying my irksome curiosity," Whimsy said amiably. "I must ask about your wartime service. Chaplain, Royal West African Frontier Force, was it?" The rector's teacup froze halfway to his lips. "Yes, though scarcely relevant." "Quite relevant, I fear. You would have carried a sidearm in those theaters. Regulations permitted it. Many chaplains favored the Colt, Army Special for its smoother recoil, did they not?" Cartwright's face drained of color until even the morning light seemed vivid against it. "I no longer possessed—" "Permit me," Whimsy interrupted softly, turning to Openshaw. The superintendent laid a narrow package on the refectory table, a moleskin roll of cleaning rods and brushes unearthed an hour earlier by Sergeant Martell behind the vicarage coal scuttle, each still greased with fresh Rangoon oil, and in its center, a short-barreled Army Special, cylinder open, chambers scrubbed immaculately bare. Cartwright sat down. "Lord have mercy." "Indeed he may," Whimsy answered, voice as gentle as it had been in Heartland's velvet drawing-room. "But first the earthly account. Why, Rector—" The words tumbled out, not with the strutting bravado of Garnet's panic, nor with Quall's iron stoicism, but with the disconsolate sincerity of a man who had prayed nightly for strength and met silence in return. Bernard Catterick, it emerged, had approached Cartwright 3 weeks earlier, insinuating that the rector's beloved Restoration Fund had been built on fraudulent provenance money. If Sir Jocelyn's chalice were revealed a forgery, the diocesan board would withdraw its matching grant. St. Etheldreda's repairs would halt, scaffolding rusting around a roof that had already claimed 2 beams of nave. "So I begged him, pleaded to wait," Cartwright said, voice raw. But he gloated. He said the scandal would drive pilgrim tourists and that spiritual edifices had profited from sin before. He planned his tableau, his letter riddle, his midnight epiphany, to make fools of us all. In that moment, I saw the transept crumble and the parish sink with it. "So you arranged your own midnight vigil," Whimsy supplied softly. "You unlocked the vestry earlier, waited behind the screen." Catterick never heard the doors groan. He was busy crowing to a shaken baronet. Cartwright nodded, tears clinging to his spectacles. "I meant only to frighten, truly. But when Jocelyn fired and the shot went high, I thought, perhaps God's judgment was invoked already. I put 1 round in my Colt and stepped forward. It happened before I could weigh eternity. A single act, and then silence. Terrible, final silence." Openshaw cleared his throat, battle-hardened face nonetheless troubled. Yet you let 2 others shoulder blame. Why confess now? The church bells rang the quarter, Cartwright whispered, and I knew what I had broken could never mend if I spoke. But concealment has tasted like sacrilege. I finished my sermon notes at dawn, yet every word rang hollow. Whimsy allowed the quiet to linger. The rector's sobs sounded too human to be hurried. Finally, the detective touched his arm. Reverend, you feared one man's pride would fell your roof. See how many pillars toppled because pride met fear in a dark transept. Better a ruined church than corrupted conscience. Cartwright met his gaze, bleak but relieved. You will tell Lady Hartland. I shall. And she, I expect, will forgive. Aristocrats inherit talent for graceful disasters. Whimsy's smile held no mockery. Come, sir, the paperwork awaits, but the truth has already rung its matins. Back at the manor, dawn's first strands glowed through high windows, gilding dust motes like incense grains. Whimsy assembled those not yet under remand. Lady Hartland, Miss Climpson, even a pallid Sir Jocelyn, to the small chapel that adjoined the long gallery. He recounted, in spare sentences, the rector's confession, how Catterick's scheme had spiraled into a tragedy of interlocking motives, each man's sin shading the next. Lady Hartland listened with clasped hands. When the narrative ended, she whispered, "Then we are all poorer, yet perhaps honest at last." Her gaze turned to Sir Jocelyn. We rebuild without pretense, better patchwork stone than paper-thin honor. Sir Jocelyn swallowed hard and nodded. I shall write to the board this morning, and to the British Museum, for advice rather than approbation. Miss Climpson, ever the practical archangel, produced a list she had drafted in the night. Reputable silversmiths, insurance contacts, even a charity in London that specialized in discreet salvage of ecclesiastical scandals. Whimsy scanned the neat columns, chuckled softly, and slipped the sheet into the baronet's hand. Miss Climpson has stitched the first lining into your new reputation, he said. See it does not unravel. News traveled swiftly through the household. Servants, who had risen in trembling anticipation of further arrests, found instead a curious calm. Parsons resumed his dominion over silverware. Even Crichton, released on Openshaw's recognizance, set to airing the curtains as though homicide were a mere draught one might expel with lavender water. By 9 o'clock, the yard beyond the scullery glistened with thaw. Whimsy, coat flung over his arm, met Superintendent Openshaw on the stone steps where crates of evidence were being loaded, shawl remnants in one, revolvers and cartridges in another, reverently cushioned by layers of brown paper as though relics of a modern martyrdom. Openshaw raised a tired salute. All parties accounted for, my lord. Rectory first, then Winchester. Whimsy inclined his head. A somber convoy, yet truth rides with you. Mind, Superintendent, when you file those bullets, note the 4-groove barrel in bold type. Some future clerk will thank you. Openshaw smiled, wry, respectful, and stepped into the police van. Its engine coughed, then steadied. Tires crackled across gravel that already glittered wet beneath the brightening sun. Whimsy watched it vanish between twin yews, then turned back toward the house. Overhead, from the nursery corridor, floated the queer, exultant call of a thrush, the first bird to believe spring might conquer frost. He felt a sudden, absurd surge of optimism. Lady Hartland stood waiting at the threshold, shawl wrapped close. "Peter," she said softly, "there will be talk in the papers. I shall face it, of course. But I wonder, would you dine with us again when the scaffolding is down? We shall have the clock set right by then, I promise." Whimsy bowed. "My dear Elspeth, I could scarcely refuse a house that keeps its clocks penitent. Besides," He glanced toward the chapel door. "I have a wager with myself that Sir Jocelyn's next donation will furnish St. Etheldreda's with the finest repair ledger in county history. One must inspect such miracles." They parted with a smile, shading by tacit agreement her into silence. Wimsey pocketed his hands, felt the reassuring scratch of the chalice's annotated catalogue page, kept perhaps as a memento of scholarship gone astray, and ambled down the drive. At the lych gate, he paused to read the notice board. In neat clerk's script someone, doubtless Miss Climpson, had appended to this Sunday's lessons a line of Virgil. "Forsan et haec olim meminisse juvabit." Perhaps someday it will please us to remember even these things. Lord Peter Wimsey adjusted his hat against the pale sun, then strolled on toward the waiting Daimler, where Briggs warmed the engine. The motor's purr was steady now, the potent sound of contrivance under control, not unlike human contrivance once truth had routed fear. He settled into the seat, gave the mildest nod, and the car rolled off, leaving Hartland Court to its long day of letters, ledgers, and quiet, necessary atonement. At precisely 8:15 the following morning, the Daimler pulled into the gravel forecourt of Hartland Hall with the sort of mechanical dignity that suggested it had personally settled baronetcies before breakfast. Lord Peter emerged with the faintly ecclesiastical air of a bishop preparing to address a particularly fractious synod. Bunter, silent as a curate, handed over the parcel wrapped in brown paper and affixed with his master's discreetly scrawled label. "Private, immediate, for Lady Hartland's attention only." The butler who opened the door, Morpeth, still pink from an argument with shoe polish, took one look at Wimsey's expression and, perhaps sensing that this was not a morning for household hierarchy, ushered him directly to the library without awaiting confirmation. Lady Hartland was already there, sitting bolt upright in a high-backed chair that looked more appropriate to the Inquisition than to morning tea. She had dressed, one suspected, as much for psychological reinforcement as for propriety. Navy silk, hard pearls, and a brooch in the shape of St. George, slaying something suspiciously dragon-shaped and vaguely liberal. "You've returned," she said. Not warmly, but not with the full Arctic severity of their first encounter either. "I assume this is not a social call." "I've never known how to make one," said Wimsey cheerfully. "Though I believe the trick is to talk about weather while quietly ruining reputations. This," he held out the parcel, "is both more direct and, I hope, more constructive." She took it and broke the seal with brisk authority. As she examined the glass plates within, a small flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. "I know this hand," she said quietly. "Cataracts, obsessive, meticulous, and always slightly slanted. Like the man himself." "Indeed. These are the original X-rays of your family chalice, posted in anticipation of an exposé that never quite occurred. Had he succeeded, I imagine the whole of Hampshire would be poring over them by now." Her fingers lingered a moment on the label. "I remember he once accused Jocelyn's father of turning the chapel into a jewelry cabinet for the nouveau riche. He never forgave what he called the aesthetic mutilation of divine silence." "A poetic phrasing, if a trifle impractical," said Wimsey, taking the chair opposite. "One cannot preserve history without pinning it down like a butterfly. I thought you should have the chance to see the truth before the police, or the press, did." She gave him a long, considering look. "You're asking me to intercede for Jocelyn." "Not exactly. I'm asking you to weigh what is owed, to truth, to your family, and to the men who acted, however clumsily, from some belief in preservation." There was a pause. Then she said, almost flatly, "The rector." "Yes. It is unlikely the Crown will proceed on a charge of murder once the bullet is shown to have originated from Quarles' gun, and the timing demonstrates panic, not malice. But his position will become untenable, and the family name, well, Hartland's scandal has a rhythm to it which journalists find irresistible. She turned back to the X-ray plates. This proves the chalice is not as it was. No, but it also proves it has value, historic, aesthetic, and financial. Enough to restore the roof with the right sale. Quietly handled through the British Museum, the piece can be preserved and displayed in a way that both protects the church and acknowledges the damage. Damage, she echoed. Not destruction? No worse than many a stained glass window touched up in Victorian hues. This is less desecration than overzealous embroidery. The silence that followed was long, but not empty. Finally, Lady Hartland rose and crossed to the fireplace, where the iron grate still held last night's ash. Into it she dropped a thin envelope, the forger's letter, no doubt, and watched as it curled and blackened without sentiment. "Send the museum curator to me," she said. "I will negotiate with him directly, but I shall expect full discretion and a public statement praising the Hartland, bequest as a model of enlightened stewardship. Of course. And the rector. I imagine he will resign," said Whimsy, "preferably before he's asked. But if you were to write a note expressing regret and, if I may suggest the term, understanding, it might allow him to leave with dignity rather than disgrace." A thin smile flickered over her lips. "You have a peculiar gift, Lord Peter." "Thank you. I've always thought I should have gone into diplomacy, but my taste in cigars disqualified me." When he returned to the village, the churchyard was sunlit and quietly busy with starlings. Cartwright sat on a stone bench near the lych gate, coat buttoned too tightly as if to contain an inner shudder. "She's agreed, then?" he asked without preamble. Whimsy nodded. "The museum will take the chalice, quietly, respectfully. You'll be consulted, of course, for the catalogue. Your notes on the object's liturgical context are likely to outlast us all." "I never meant—" Cartwright began, then stopped. Whimsy sat beside him. "No, you didn't mean to shoot, and you didn't. But you buried the evidence and falsified a timeline, and in law, that's obstruction. You'll be asked to step down." "I will," said the rector. "I've written to the bishop already. He'll understand. It was," he faltered, "a kind of madness. Not wanting to lose everything. The roof, the chalice, the church. Jocelyn wasn't thinking. Neither was I." "You were both thinking," said Whimsy. "Just not clearly. The Gothic mind often confuses faith with preservation. But bricks and gold aren't holy, you know. Only truth is." Cartwright said nothing, but he looked away, blinking more rapidly than the breeze quite accounted for. By noon, the police had received formal notification from the museum confirming the altered provenance of the chalice. Quarl's gun, retrieved by Parker from his lockbox in Andover, was demonstrated to have fired the bullet lodged in the nave plaster. Garnet, when presented with the evidence of his forged certificate, attempted a feeble appeal to artistic license, then folded with a sigh worthy of Ibsen and requested legal counsel. Sir Jocelyn remained unseen, sequestered in a guest room at the Hall, reportedly composing a letter of resignation from 3 local committees and attempting to price his first editions. His solicitor, when reached, suggested that a sale of the Burrell etchings might forestall bankruptcy, though not disgrace. Whimsy, with a sigh that echoed faintly in the nave's renewed silence, took one last look around St. Etheldreda's. The scaffold had been taken down, the blood washed away, and the ancient air restored. Cool, candle-scented and indifferently watching as men continued to lose and recover their souls beneath the same ancient stones. As he stepped out into the light, Bunter appeared at his elbow with the Daimler door open and a faint smile of completion. "Shall I telephone the Savile Club, my lord?" "If you would. I feel a pressing need to be mocked by people who know the difference between a papal bull and a Hereford ox." "Very good, my lord. And Bunter, remind me to return that bullet to the museum archives." "Framed or loose?" "Loose," said Whimsy. "Let them puzzle over it." After all, mystery, like wine, matures best in silence. Lord Peter Wimsey settled into the leather armchair of the Savile Club with the sort of languid satisfaction that comes only from closing a case that had danced on the edge of tragedy and farce alike. The room hummed with the low murmur of other gentlemen absorbed in their afternoon's trifling. A chess match, the Times crossword, whispered critiques of the House of Commons. Yet Wimsey's mind, ever the restless raconteur, was turning over the final fragments of the Heartland affair like a rare cigar between thumb and forefinger. Bunter, ever discreet, hovered nearby with a fresh pot of tea and a tray of impeccably buttered crumpets. The butler's expression suggested he found the consumption of such a repast at 4 in the afternoon marginally more civilized than inhaling a blast of sultry tobacco smoke. "I trust the club's discreet enough for your reflections, my lord?" "Absolutely. There is something about a room full of men who have learned the fine art of polite indifference that soothes the nerves. Besides, Bunter, you must admit that having one's intellectual peccadilloes overheard by the local constabulary might not enhance the reputation of an inquiry already burdened with ecclesiastical scandal." Bunter smiled faintly, setting down the tray. "Indeed, my lord. Though I dare say the county police have proven themselves admirably resilient to scandal of late." Wimsey nodded. "Quite so. Now, to the matter of Jocelyn Heartland. He is, I gather, to retreat quietly from public life for a time, his pride salted but his liberty intact. His resignation letters are penned, his debts enumerated with that peculiar blend of desperation and detachment that only the imminent loss of social standing can inspire. And the rector? Cartwright, poor man, is a shadow, already diminished by guilt and circumstance. Yet I suspect he will find solace in quieter parishes or perhaps an academic retreat. One can hardly imagine him returning to a congregation so riven with suspicion and whispered recrimination." Bunter poured the tea, the delicate china making a faint clinking sound that punctuated the conversation like a metronome. "It was a strange case, my lord. Not the usual cut and thrust of criminality, but a web woven from vanity, fear, and the oddest forms of devotion." "Precisely," said Wimsey, lighting a cigar with the precision of a surgeon. "The most curious thing about these human dramas is how often the true motive lies not in avarice or passion, but in the desire to protect an idea, often an illusion. Jocelyn's fierce guardianship of the chapel's legacy was less about the stones and more about the story he told himself to keep the wolves at bay." He drew a thoughtful puff and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling like a question mark above his head. And then there was the forger, Garnet, who fancied himself an artist rather than a charlatan. His signature on the certificates was the giveaway, despite his protestations of artistic license. One suspects he underestimated the acuity of all involved, though perhaps not their patience. The conversation turned naturally to the more curious details, the soundproofing of the vestry, the oddly misaligned clocks in the hall, and the vanished salver from the rector's office. Wimsey smiled at the memory. "Ah, the salver," he murmured. "A minor piece of silver, easily overlooked, yet indispensable to the story. It served as a perfect metaphor. Something once integral, now missing without anyone willing to admit why." Bunter nodded knowingly. "And the clocks, my lord?" Your insistence on checking their synchronization seemed, at first, a mere quirk. Not a quirk, but a key. The timing of Jocelyn's movements and the recorded tolling of the church bells depended entirely on the assumption that all clocks told the same story. When one was fast and another slow, the neat narrative unraveled like an overwound watch. "Fascinating," murmured Bunter. "And yet no one thought to check until you arrived." "Precisely. It is the small inconsistencies, the barely audible echoes, the slight misalignments, that form the cracks through which truth slips. The human mind, desperate for order, often prefers a tidy lie." The club clock chimed 5, and Whimsy rose with a languorous stretch, the quiet enthusiasm of a man who had, at last, closed the book on a perplexing puzzle. "As for the future," he said, "I imagine Heartland Hall will return to its comfortable rhythms. The villagers will gossip in the bakery, the vicarage will settle into a somber routine, and the chapel will stand, scarred but dignified, against the creeping ivy." Bunter opened the door, and Whimsy paused, looking back at the club's interior, the sanctuary of gentle wit and courteous debate. "Do you think, Bunter," he mused aloud, "that the game is ever truly over, or do we simply pause until the next move beckons?" Bunter smiled. "I suspect, my lord, the game continues as long as there are mysteries to solve and cigars to smoke." Whimsy's eyes twinkled with that familiar blend of irony and affection. "Then let us ensure we are ready. After all, a well-timed epigram can be as lethal as any bullet." With a final nod, he stepped out into the London dusk, the city's shadows lengthening like the final notes of a sonata. Somewhere, a bell tolled, and Lord Peter Whimsy, gentleman, scholar, detective, disappeared into the night, already turning the next enigma over in his mind with that inimitable mixture of elegance, erudition, and a touch of mischief. The study at Heartland Hall was dim, save for the soft flicker of a solitary candle whose dancing light cast long, wavering shadows across the walls lined with leather-bound tomes and the fading portraits of long-forgotten ancestors. Lord Peter Whimsy stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp and precise, as though every detail of the room awaited his scrutiny for the final, crucial insight. Across from him sat the assembled household, Lady Heartland, still pale but composed, Rector Cartwright, eyes heavy with regret, Jocelyn, humbled yet steadfast, and Miss Farnsworth, now under guard but serene, her composure unbroken despite the weight of her confession. Whimsy addressed the company with the deliberate cadence of a man unveiling a carefully crafted sonnet. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is a truth universally acknowledged that the threads of deception, no matter how intricately woven, cannot withstand the patient unraveling brought about by reason and observation." He paused, allowing a faint smile to soften the severity of the moment. Miss Farnsworth's motives were, regrettably, grounded in a past grievance, one that twisted loyalty into vengeance and truth into forgery. Her manipulation of the chapel's artifacts and the carefully orchestrated distractions aimed to conceal her presence at the moment of Mr. Garnet's unfortunate death. Turning slightly toward the rector, Whimsy continued, "Mr. Cartwright's role was that of a man desperate to protect both his flock and his own dignity, caught in a tragedy that spiraled beyond intention. The fatal shot was, as you have acknowledged, an accident born of panic rather than malice." Whimsy's eyes then settled on Jocelyn. "And you, Mr. Heartland, while perhaps guilty of imprudence and vanity, were neither complicit in the forgery nor in the events that followed. Your resignation and resolve to atone for your missteps demonstrate a man seeking redemption rather than escape." The detective's gaze swept the room once more, before concluding with a touch of his characteristic dry irony. The mystery, therefore, was never one of black and white, but shades of gray, of human frailty, the perilous weight of secrets, and the illusions we cling to. It is a narrative that reminds us how often the most monstrous acts arise not from hatred, but from misguided love and fear. Lady Heartland, a shadow of a smile touching her lips, inclined her head in silent assent. Rector Cartwright exhaled, the release of tension almost audible. Jocelyn looked relieved, a subtle hope rekindled in his eyes. Miss Farnsworth remained impassive, her final words a quietly uttered apology, carrying more truth than any forged document ever could. Whimsy extended a hand to Bunter, who had quietly entered with a tray of freshly brewed tea, the ordinary gesture, a testament to the return of order amidst chaos. As the household dispersed, Whimsy lingered, gazing out the mullioned window at the moonlit grounds. The past, with all its shadows and half-truths, had been laid bare. Yet the night whispered that while one mystery closes, another inevitably awaits. With a faint smile, Whimsy turned from the window, his parting words lingering in the stillness. Justice is not the loud roar of the crowd, but the quiet certainty that, when all is done, truth will find its way, even through the thickest fog of human folly. And so, with his usual blend of erudition and wit, Lord Peter Wimsey vanished once more into the night, a guardian of reason in a world too often tempted by superstition and deceit.